Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with the marketing of a listing that you do and the cost that you incur, and what happens if a seller terminates the listing agreement early. So let's talk about that and let's see what the agreement says. So when you take a listing for sale, there are a variety of services that you are going to provide to a seller to market the property and get it exposed to get a buyer who will submit an offer where the seller and the buyer can go binding and sell the house and have a wonderful transaction. So perhaps in one of the services or of the many services that you provide, perhaps you take you make flyers, or perhaps you take photos, or perhaps you pay a photographer to take photos, or perhaps you take drone photos. There are costs incurred, costs of business that you incur as a listing agent when you take a listing for sale in order to market that property, in addition to putting it in a variety of MLS services to which your broker belongs. So again, there are costs associated with all of these marketing efforts, and everything is great when you get the property sold. Again, that is a cost of business. However, what happens when a seller defaults on the listing agreement by terminating early? If they terminate early, sooner than the expiration or termination or mutual termination of that agreement, that does constitute a seller default on the legally binding contract that they sign with your broker to put the property up for sale. What about those costs? What do you do? How are they do you just mark it up to a business expense? Is it something the seller is to reimburse you for? Well, as I always say, let's look at the contract and see what the instructions say. So let's start with the GAR purchase and sale agreement, not purchase and sale. Let's start with the GAR listing agreement, and let's take a look and see what this actually says. So this is the GAR exclusive right to sell listing agreement, which is F101. And the first thing that we need to talk about is in paragraph B5 under marketing. There's a lot of it in there that it basically says the broker has no control over the marketing on third-party listing services. Those are for example, online sites that we have no control over the direct access to those kinds of marketing. But it does say any media created or purchased by the broker to be used in the marketing effort shall not belong to or be property of the seller and may not be copied, reproduced, or used by the seller or other third parties without the express written permission of the broker. Seller warrants that any media provided or paid for by the seller is the property of the seller and agrees to indemnify the broker for any claim by a third party related to the use of provided media. Broker shall be allowed to use the seller provided materials during the term of this agreement with any third party for the purposes of marketing the property, and seller acknowledges that the broker shall not be liable to the seller for the continued use of the media by third parties after the termination of this agreement. So basically, anything that you pay for belongs to you. Anything that the seller pays for belongs to the seller, but the seller gives you the right to use it during the term of this marketing. It also states that the broker agrees to file the agreement with the MLS services, which you itemize on the first page, within 1 business day of the beginning of the marketing. So that's where it talks about the marketing. There's some more in there, but it's not pertinent to today's discussion. Now, one more thing under paragraph E, it does say no marketing by owner. Owner is encouraged to communicate the availability of the property for sale to friends and other acquaintances. However, since the broker has been hired to exclusively market and show the property, owner shall not, with respect to the sale of the property, prepare and distribute marketing materials, hold open houses, put up signs regarding the property, create website for the property, prepare flyers, brochures, or videos, or engage in other similar activities without the prior written consent of the broker. Okay, now further on in this, which again is F101 in GAR, Georgia Association of Realtors, the exclusive seller listing agreement, where it talks about seller default. And that is under paragraph C1. Seller default. In the event the seller defaults in the agreement, which again, an early termination would be a default on the agreement, seller shall, in addition to its other obligations set forth elsewhere, reimburse the broker for the out-of-pocket costs and expenses incurred by the broker and the broker's affiliated licensees in seeking to market and sell the property. Such costs and expenses shall include, without limitation, printing, copying charges, mileage at the highest rate allowed by the IRS as a business deduction, and expenses to advertise the property in various media. Seller shall also pay all costs, fees, and charges for removing the listing from any multiple listing service. The payment of these costs, fees, and charges and expenses by the seller shall not waive or limit the broker's right to assert any other claim, cause of action, or suit, and that has nothing to do with, notwithstanding the above, the amount of such fees, charges, and costs, expenses paid by the seller to the broker shall be an offset against any claim for real estate commission. So that's where it talks about that in the GAR, Georgia Association of Realtors listing agreement. Now let's see what it says in the RE form listing agreement. And that is RE 151, exclusive right to sell. And under this agreement, it is under the broker compensation paragraph 3. It states basically that it talks about a seller paying a broker a retainer fee. Well, let me just read it to you. Seller acknowledges and agrees that the broker is providing a valuable service to the seller by marketing the property and may incur significant costs and expenses in doing so. In order to partially compensate the broker for the broker's time, in the event no commission is paid hereunder, so that would be an early termination if it doesn't sell, seller has paid to the broker a retainer fee in the amount of X amount of dollars, which fee shall be deposited into the broker's trust account. Then it goes on to say, this fee shall be refundable to the seller only if the broker is paid a full commission as provided above. Upon the termination or expiration of this agreement or the closing of the property, broker shall be authorized to transfer the retainer fee to the broker's general account. In the event the property is sold and a commission is due the broker, the seller shall at closing receive a credit against the commission due, so you offset the retainer fee against the commission. Now, it goes on to say, notwithstanding the payment of a retainer fee is provided above, the seller shall reimburse the broker for the broker's affiliated licensees for their costs and expenses incurred in marketing the property, including but not limited to printing costs, advertising fees, mileage reimbursements, and multiple listing fees. If the seller defaults hereunder, so again, it's the same reimbursement discussion that the GAR form had. The right to collect reimbursement for these costs and expenses shall be in addition to and not in lieu of any other claim or cause of action the broker may have hereunder, except that these costs and expenses may be offset against any commission paid to the broker. So if you, so the RE listing agreement talks about a couple of things. It talks about a retainer fee to offset a listing agent's upfront marketing expenses, but then it does talk about reimbursement obligation by the seller should the seller default. Now, if you like the idea of a retainer fee, the GAR purchase and sale agreement does have a separate exhibit called the retainer fee exhibit, and that exhibit is Exhibit F-149 Retainer Fee Exhibit. And this is a retainer fee exhibit that does state it does have to do with an agency agreement. So this would be for a buyer brokerage agreement or a listing agreement. Typically, we see them more often with a buyer brokerage agreement, but it would be appropriate for a listing agreement for marketing expenses. So this does say client will pay a retainer fee for to the broker for the services in the amount of X amount of dollars, which shall be deemed earned upon payment and does not need to be placed in escrow. This fee shall be payable to the broker in advance of signing this agreement. Now, that's one distinction I want to place. The retainer fee paragraph in the RE Forms listing agreement, that is trust money. So that is not available for you as an agent to use for your marketing expenses until the end of the brokerage agreement. The retainer fee exhibit in the Georgia Association of Realtors exhibit contracts, that is due and payable upon receipt and does not need to be held as trust money. So bottom line, what do? What should you do? Well, a couple of things. Number one, if hopefully your sellers don't default or terminate early and you get the property sold and your marketing expenses were well worth the effort. But should the seller default and you're asking for compensation from the seller for your out-of-pocket expenses, well, FMLS and Georgia MLS, they each charge a $25 withdrawal fee for a total of $50 to withdraw the listing. And that documentation, those prices are outlined on the FMLS and Georgia MLS withdrawal fee forms. However, point of practice for you as an agent, I strongly suggest that you keep track of all of your marketing expenses, complete with receipts, mileage, costs, and expenses. And should this become an issue, you will have a receipt to itemize the out-of-pocket expenses that you have. Now, if you are going to hire a professional photographer or a drone, for example, it's always a good idea to prevent an issue before it occurs. So you might definitely want to consider talking to the seller about these marketing efforts and the cost that you are going to incur for that should the seller terminate early, so that there are no surprises to the seller for the compensation for these out-of-pocket marketing fees. Another idea, and please check with your broker or a closing attorney, would be to add a special stipulation in your listing agreement to have a flat fee for an early termination fee. Again, the issue is hopefully you don't want your seller to terminate early. Sometimes there are issues where a seller decides not to put the house for sale right now, or something changes and they are not going to sell the house. Well, so if you want to address an early termination fee up front as a special stipulation, then there are no surprises when a seller does default on the contract by terminating your listing agreement or buyer brokerage agreement. But this is more in terms of listing, specifically with professional photos and drone photos, for example, just some photography that costs a little more. You might want to address it as a special stipulation when you take the listing. And in general, I am not an accountant and I'm not a CPA, but you definitely would want to talk with your tax preparer about your business expenses incurred with being a listing agent, and just talk about how that is going to look, again, as your business expenses when you do file your taxes. I think that's it. I just wanted to bring those out to you, bring those clauses in the brokerage, in the listing agreements to your attention, as well as touch on the retainer fee exhibit and the retainer fee and a little bit about what the differences between the RE forms and the GAR forms. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please comment below your experiences with your marketing and the expenses and what you feel about asking the seller to compensate you for your out-of-market expenses, or if this is just it's definitely a fee for your business. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.